The words hit me like a physical blow, sitting there in that sterile counseling office with its beige walls and artificial plants. Sarah, I think you need to examine whether your expectations are realistic for a marriage, Dr. Patricia Green said, her pen poised over her notepad as she looked at me with what I can only describe as professional pity. Sometimes we create our own disappointment by asking for more than our partners can give. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I felt my cheeks burn as Mark shifted beside me on the uncomfortable couch, and I caught the slight upturn of his lips, the barely concealed smugness that told me he felt vindicated. 22 years of marriage, and this is what it had come to. A stranger in a white coat telling me that wanting my husband to remember our anniversary, to help with household responsibilities, to show up emotionally for our children, was asking too much. But let me tell you what happened when I stopped expecting anything at all. Let me tell you how my husband surprised me by giving me everything I'd ever asked for, just not in the way any of us expected. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and at 45, I thought I had figured out the delicate balance of managing a demanding career as a hospital administrator at Desert Valley Medical Center, while maintaining what appeared to be a picture-perfect family life in our Ahwatukee Foothills neighborhood. Our two-story desert contemporary home sat on a corner lot with mountain views, the kind of place that screamed suburban success. Emma, our 19-year-old, was finishing her freshman year at Arizona State University, while Tyler, 16, was navigating the challenging waters of high school with the added pressure of varsity soccer. From the outside, we looked like we had it all together. Mark's construction company, Mitchell & Harrison Construction, had been thriving for over a decade, specializing in custom homes throughout the Phoenix metro area. We drove nice cars, took annual vacations to San Diego, and never missed a soccer game or school event. Our social media feeds were filled with family barbecues, hiking adventures in the desert, and holiday celebrations that looked effortlessly coordinated. The reality was far more complicated. For years, I had been operating as the CEO of our household while maintaining a full-time career that demanded 60-hour weeks. I scheduled every appointment, remembered every birthday, coordinated every family gathering, managed every detail of our children's lives, and handled every aspect of our home's maintenance and organization. When the air conditioning broke during Phoenix's brutal summer months, I researched contractors and scheduled repairs. When Emma needed help with her college applications, I spent weekends reviewing essays and financial aid forms. When Tyler struggled with algebra, I found tutors and managed his study schedule. Mark, meanwhile, seemed to float through our family life like a benevolent observer, showing up for the fun parts while remaining blissfully unaware of the infrastructure required to make those moments possible. He was the dad who swooped in for game-winning soccer celebrations, but had never once scheduled a doctor's appointment. He was the husband who enjoyed our beautifully decorated home, but couldn't tell you where we kept the vacuum cleaner or when we'd last had the carpets cleaned. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in April, one of those perfect Arizona spring nights when the temperature drops to something resembling comfortable. I had just finished a 12-hour shift dealing with a staffing crisis in the emergency department, coordinated Tyler's ride home from soccer practice via text while sitting in back-to-back budget meetings, and stopped at the grocery store to pick up ingredients for dinner because our refrigerator had somehow become empty again. I walked into our kitchen to find Mark sitting at the granite island, scrolling through his phone while eating cereal directly from the box. The breakfast dishes from that morning were still in the sink, exactly where I'd left them with the silent hope that someone else might take initiative. The mail was scattered across the counter, unopened and mixed with Tyler's homework assignments and sports equipment that had migrated from the garage. "How was your day?" Mark asked without looking up from his phone, the kind of automatic question that expected an equally automatic response. "Exhausting," I said, setting down grocery bags and beginning the familiar routine of unpacking while simultaneously scanning the kitchen to assess what needed to be cleaned, organized, or prepared for the next day. Dr. Martinez called in sick, so we were short-staffed all day. I had to stay late to cover his meetings with the department heads about the new patient management system. Mark responded, still absorbed in whatever was capturing his attention on the screen. I began putting away groceries, my movements becoming more pointed as the silence stretched. Tyler has a game Thursday night. Did you remember to request the time off? Thursday? Mark's head finally lifted, confusion creasing his features. This Thursday? The familiar knot formed in my stomach, the one that appeared whenever I realized that something I'd mentioned multiple times had failed to register in my husband's awareness. Yes, Mark. The playoff game I told you about last week, and 2 weeks ago. I put it on the family calendar, I mentioned it at dinner Sunday night, and I sent you a text reminder yesterday. Right, Thursday. He nodded as if the information was now successfully downloading. I think I can move some things around. You think you can move things around for your son's playoff game? The edge in my voice was unmistakable now, sharpened by years of having this same conversation in various forms. This isn't a casual scrimmage, Mark. This determines whether his team advances to regionals. Tyler's been training all season for this moment. Mark finally set down his phone, and I recognized the defensive posture that preceded most of our arguments. Sarah, you know how busy things are right now. The Henderson project is behind schedule, and if we don't get the foundation, toward this week we're looking at serious delays. Steve is already stressed about the timeline. Steve is stressed, I repeated slowly, feeling the familiar burn of resentment building in my chest. Your business partner is stressed, so our son's pivotal soccer game takes a back seat to concrete. That's not fair, and you know it. This project represents a significant portion of our revenue for the quarter. Without it, we can't make the payments on Tyler's soccer club fees or Emma's college tuition. The argument that followed was depressingly familiar, a well-worn path we'd traveled countless times over the years. Mark would frame his absence from family obligations as financial sacrifice for our benefit, while I would point out that other fathers managed to balance demanding careers with active participation in their children's lives. He would accuse me of being unreasonable and demanding, while I would catalog the endless list of responsibilities I managed without his input or assistance. But this particular evening, something felt different. Maybe it was the accumulated weight of 22 years of the same circular arguments, or perhaps it was the realization that Emma would graduate college in 3 years and Tyler would follow, shortly after, leaving us with an empty nest and the stark reality of what our marriage had become. Whatever the catalyst, I found myself saying words that surprised us both. I think we need professional help. Mark's eyebrows shot up, his expression shifting from defensive annoyance to genuine alarm. Professional help? What do you mean? Marriage counseling. We're stuck in patterns that aren't working, and I don't think we can fix this on our own anymore. The silence that followed was loaded with 22 years of accumulated tension, unmet expectations, and the kind of deep fatigue that comes from fighting the same battles repeatedly without resolution. Mark's initial response was predictable. Resistance, the masculine reluctance to involve outsiders in private matters, but something in my expression must have conveyed the seriousness of the situation. Fine, he said finally, the word carrying the weight of reluctant surrender. If you think it will help, we can try counseling. Finding Dr. Patricia Green felt like a victory at first. Her office was located in a wellness center on Camelback Road, decorated in soothing earth tones with inspirational quotes about communication and healing prominently displayed on the walls. Her credentials were impressive, with decades of experience in marriage and family therapy, and her initial consultation seemed promising. During our first session, I carefully articulated what I saw as the core issues in our marriage. I explained, how I felt like a single parent despite being married, how the mental load of managing our household and family fell disproportionately on my shoulders, how Mark's physical presence didn't translate to emotional or practical engagement with our daily lives. "I'm not asking for perfection," I told Dr. Green while Mark sat beside me, nodding along as if my words were perfectly reasonable. "I just want partnership. I want to feel like we're building this life together instead of me constructing it while he enjoys the finished product." Mark's version of our problems was quite different. He saw me as controlling and critical, someone who micromanaged every aspect of our home life, and then complained when he didn't meet standards he'd never agreed to. "Sarah has very specific ideas about how things should be done," he explained, to Dr. Green with the patience of someone explaining a difficult concept to a child. "If I load the dishwasher wrong, she redoes it. If I plan a family outing, she finds problems with every detail. It's easier to let her handle things the way she wants them done." Dr. Green listened to both perspectives with professional neutrality, taking notes and asking clarifying questions that seemed designed to help us understand each other's viewpoints. But as the sessions progressed, I began to notice a subtle shift in her approach, a gentle but persistent suggestion that perhaps my expectations were the primary source of our marital discord. "Sarah, I'm wondering if we might explore your need for control," she said during our fourth session. "It's possible that Mark would be more engaged if he felt trusted to handle responsibilities in his own way, rather than feeling judged for not meeting predetermined standards." The suggestion stung because it touched on my deepest fears about myself. Was I a perfectionist whose impossible standards drove my husband away from participation in our shared life? Was I so focused on how things got done that I'd forgotten to appreciate that they were getting done at all? Over the following weeks, Dr. Green continued this theme, gently but consistently suggesting that my approach to marriage might be contributing to the very problems I was hoping to solve. She recommended books about letting go and accepting imperfection in relationships. She assigned exercises designed to help me step back and allow Mark more space to contribute in his own way. I threw myself into the process with the same determination I brought to everything else in my life. I bit my tongue when Mark loaded the dishwasher with plates facing the wrong direction. I said nothing when he forgot to pack Tyler's water bottle for soccer practice, resulting in our son's dehydration during a particularly hot afternoon. I smiled and expressed gratitude when Mark surprised me with dinner plans that conflicted with Emma's college orientation meeting, forcing me to reschedule an important work commitment to attend. "I can see real progress in your willingness to adjust your expectations," Dr. Green told me after I shared these examples during a session. "Relationships require compromise, and it sounds like you're learning to be more flexible." Mark beamed beside me, vindicated by the professional confirmation that I had been the problem all along. "Sarah's been much more relaxed lately," he agreed. "It's made our home a much more peaceful place." But something felt fundamentally wrong about this dynamic. The peace in our home seemed to come at the cost of my voice, my needs, my legitimate expectations for partnership in our marriage. I was doing all the adjusting, all the compromising, all the stepping back, while Mark continued operating exactly as he always had, now with professional blessing for his approach. The breaking point came during a session in late May, just as Phoenix was transitioning from pleasant spring weather to the unforgiving heat of summer. I had spent the previous weekend managing Emma's move home from her college dorm, coordinating Tyler's summer soccer camp registration, planning and executing our annual Memorial Day barbecue for extended family, and dealing with a plumbing emergency that flooded our guest bathroom while Mark played golf with Steve. "I'm struggling with something," I told Dr. Green, trying to find words for the growing sense of disconnection I felt from my own life. "I understand the importance of compromise and flexibility, but I feel like I'm disappearing. It's as if accommodating Mark's way of being in our marriage means there's no room for my needs or expectations at all." Doctor. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Green leaned forward slightly, her expression both sympathetic and slightly concerned. Sarah, I think this might be a good opportunity to examine whether your needs and expectations are realistic for a marriage. Sometimes we create our own disappointment by asking for more than our partners can give. The words landed like a physical blow, exactly as I described at the beginning of this story. But what Dr. Green didn't know, what Mark didn't know, was that her professional dismissal of my legitimate needs would become the catalyst for a chain of events that would give me everything I'd ever asked for in my marriage, just not in the way any of us expected. Sitting in that office, watching my husband's satisfied smile and feeling the weight of professional judgment settling over my shoulders like a heavy blanket, I made a decision that would change everything. If my expectations were truly unreasonable, if my needs were too demanding for marriage, then I would stop expecting anything at all. What happened next would surprise everyone, especially Dr. Patricia Green, who would eventually call me to offer an apology that came far too late to matter. The weeks following that devastating counseling session passed in a strange haze of emotional detachment. I had made a conscious decision to stop being the driving force behind our family's daily operations, and the results were immediate and eye-opening. It took exactly 3 days for our household systems to begin crumbling. Without my constant oversight and intervention, Tyler missed his orthodontist appointment because no one had marked it on any calendar except mine, and I had stopped transferring family obligations to the shared digital calendar that Mark never checked anyway. Emma called from college in tears because the tuition payment was late, triggering a hold on her account that prevented her from registering for summer classes. The hold occurred because Mark had assumed I would handle the payment as always, while I had assumed that his repeated promises to take care of the finances meant he would actually take care of them. Our refrigerator became a science experiment of expired food and empty containers that no one bothered to discard or replace. The laundry basket overflowed until Tyler started wearing slightly dirty soccer uniforms to practice, finally asking me where the clean clothes were kept. When I responded that I didn't know because I wasn't doing laundry anymore, his confusion was almost comical. "But you always do the laundry," he said, as if I were a household appliance that had inexplicably stopped functioning. "I always did the laundry," I corrected gently. "There's a difference." Mark's reaction to my withdrawal was initially subtle, then increasingly panicked as he began to realize the scope of responsibilities that had been quietly managed without his awareness or participation. The first crisis hit when his business partner Steve called our house looking for Mark, who had missed an important client meeting because he hadn't written it down anywhere and had grown accustomed to me managing his schedule reminders. "I don't understand what's happening," Mark said, standing in our kitchen surrounded by the evidence of our household's rapid decline into chaos. "You're acting like a completely different person. This isn't like you at all." He was right. The version of myself that I was becoming felt foreign and uncomfortable, but also oddly liberating. For the first time in years, I was coming home from work and sitting down with a book instead of immediately launching into the evening routine of homework supervision, meal preparation, and household management. I was sleeping better, despite the chaos around me, because I wasn't lying awake mentally cataloging everything that needed to be accomplished the following day. Maybe this is who I actually am when I'm not compensating for someone else's lack of engagement, I told him, surprised by the calm certainty in my own voice. Mark's frustration was evident, but so was something else. A growing awareness that our family's smooth operation had never been as effortless as he'd assumed. "Sarah, I don't understand what you want from me. You've always been better at organizing things, at remembering details. I thought we had a system that worked." "We had a system where I did everything and you showed up for the results," I clarified. "That's not the same thing as a partnership." The conversation might have continued, But Tyler chose that moment to announce that he needed $40 for a team dinner that night, information he'd forgotten to share until 30 minutes before he needed to leave. In our previous life, I would have scrambled to find cash, making mental notes to add this expense to our budget tracking and to remind Mark about future team obligations. Instead, I looked at both of them expectantly. "I don't have $40 in cash," Mark said, patting his pockets uselessly. "Sarah, do you have any cash?" "I'm not managing team dinners anymore," I replied, returning to my book. "Tyler, you'll need to figure this out with your father." The panic in both their expressions was almost amusing. Mark ended up driving to 3 different ATMs because he couldn't remember his PIN for the first 2, making Tyler 20 minutes late for the team gathering. When they returned home, Mark's mood had shifted from confused frustration to something approaching real concern. "We need to talk," he said, his usual casual confidence replaced by an uncertainty I hadn't seen in years. But our conversation was interrupted by my phone ringing with a call that would change everything. The caller ID showed the name of someone I hadn't spoken to in months, Jennifer Adams, my supervisor at Desert Valley Medical Center. "Sarah, I'm sorry to call so late." Jennifer's voice carried an unusual excitement. "I know you're probably settling in for the evening, but I have news that couldn't wait until tomorrow." I stepped onto our back patio, grateful for the excuse to escape the tension in the kitchen. The desert sunset was painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, and our pool reflected the colors like a liquid mirror. "What's going on, Jen?" "Dr. Morrison is retiring," she announced, referring to the chief of hospital operations, a position that had seemed impossibly remote to someone at my level. "The board is looking for his replacement, and your name came up in the discussion today." My heart skipped several beats. The chief of operations position represented everything I'd worked toward throughout my career, but had never seriously considered within reach. It would mean a substantial salary increase, comprehensive oversight of multiple departments, and the kind of professional recognition I'd dreamed about, but never vocalized. "My name came up?" I repeated, needing confirmation that I'd heard correctly. "More than came up," Jennifer continued. "Dr. Mitchell specifically mentioned your innovative work on the patient flow optimization project. The way you coordinated between departments to reduce emergency room wait times caught the attention of the entire executive team. They want to interview you next week." Dr. Mitchell, no relation to my husband despite sharing his surname, was the hospital's chief medical officer and someone I'd worked with on several high-profile initiatives. The patient flow project had been my baby, a comprehensive analysis of bottlenecks in our emergency department that had resulted in a 30% reduction in average wait times. I'd spent months collecting data, interviewing staff, and developing implementation strategies, often working late into the evening after managing my family's needs. "Sarah, are you still there?" Jennifer's voice brought me back to the moment. "Yes, I'm here. I'm just surprised. When would the interview be?" "Tuesday afternoon. I know it's short notice, but they want to move quickly. Dr. Morrison's retirement is effective at the end of next month, and they need someone who can transition smoothly into the role." After ending the call, I stood on the patio for several minutes, watching the last light fade from the sky and trying to process this unexpected opportunity. The timing felt surreal, just as my personal life was unraveling. My professional life was presenting possibilities I'd never dared to pursue seriously. When I returned to the kitchen, Mark was loading dishes into the dishwasher with the careful concentration of someone performing an unfamiliar task. Tyler had disappeared, presumably to his room to avoid the tension that seemed to permeate our home these days. "Who was that?" Mark asked without looking up from his dishwashing project. "Jennifer from work. They want to interview me for a promotion." This information finally captured his full attention. "What kind of promotion?" "Chief of hospital operations. It would be a significant increase in responsibility and salary." Mark's expression shifted through several emotions: surprise, calculation, and something that looked almost like pride. "That's great, Sarah. Really great. See? Good things happen when you stop stressing about every little detail around here." His attempt to connect my professional opportunity with his narrative about my supposed over-controlling tendencies was so tone-deaf that I almost laughed. Instead, I studied my husband's face, wondering when I'd stopped recognizing the person I'd married 22 years earlier. "The interview is Tuesday afternoon," I said simply. "I'll need to leave work early to prepare." "Tuesday?" Mark's forehead creased with concern. "I think I have the Henderson project walkthrough that day. Steve and I are meeting with the clients to discuss the final details." In our previous dynamic, this would have been my cue to rearrange my schedule to accommodate his business needs. I would have asked Jennifer to reschedule my interview, explaining that family obligations took precedence over career advancement. The old Sarah would have smiled and assured Mark that his meeting was obviously more important than my opportunity. "That's unfortunate timing," I said instead. "You'll have to figure out childcare for Tyler if he gets home before I do." Mark's confusion was evident. "Childcare? Tyler's 16, Sarah. He doesn't need childcare. Someone needs to be here when he gets home from school. Someone needs to make sure he has something to eat, that his homework gets done, that he doesn't spend the entire afternoon playing video games instead of preparing for his chemistry test on Friday." "How do you know he has a chemistry test on Friday?" The question hung in the air between us, highlighting the vast gap in our awareness of our children's daily lives. "Because I pay attention, Mark. Because I read the emails from his teachers, check his assignment calendar, and ask him about his schoolwork." "I pay attention too," Mark protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "When was Tyler's last soccer game?" "Last weekend?" "He had 2 games last weekend." "What were the scores?" Mark's silence was answer enough. "What's Emma's major?" "Communications. She changed to pre-med in February." The weight of these small revelations seemed to settle over Mark like a heavy blanket. For the first time, I saw genuine recognition in his eyes, an acknowledgement that his participation in our family's daily life had been surface level at best. "Sarah, I don't understand what's happening here. Are you punishing me for something? Is this about the counseling sessions?" The question was fair, and I considered it carefully before responding. "I'm not punishing you, Mark. I'm just not doing everything anymore. Dr. Green suggested that my expectations were unrealistic, so I'm adjusting them. I'm expecting nothing from you, and so far you're meeting those expectations perfectly." The following days passed in a strange mixture of household chaos and personal clarity. Without my constant intervention, our family's carefully maintained routines disintegrated rapidly. Tyler ate cereal for dinner 3 nights in a row because no one had planned or prepared meals. Emma called twice to complain that no one had communicated with her about family plans, leaving her feeling disconnected and uninformed about basic household decisions. Mark's business began experiencing problems as well. Without my unofficial role as his administrative assistant, he missed follow-up calls with potential clients, forgot to submit permits for active projects, and double-booked himself for meetings. Because he'd never developed a reliable system for managing his schedule. "I don't understand how you kept track of everything," he admitted Thursday night, sitting at our kitchen island with multiple calendars, notebooks, and his phone spread before him in a chaotic attempt to organize his responsibilities. "I never realized how much you were managing behind the scenes." The admission felt like a small victory, but it was tempered by the exhaustion in his voice and the growing realization that our problems extended far beyond simple oversight and organization. Mark's lack of engagement wasn't just about forgetting appointments or missing details. It reflected a fundamental disconnection from the emotional labor required to maintain a family. Saturday morning brought another revelation when Emma came home unexpectedly, having driven down from Tempe to collect some belongings she'd forgotten when she moved out of her dorm. She walked into our kitchen and stopped short, taking in the evidence of our household's decline with the sharp eye of someone who'd grown up in a very different environment. "What happened here?" she asked, gesturing toward the stack of unopened mail, the empty refrigerator, and the general sense of abandonment that had settled over our once pristine home. "Your mother is going through some kind of phase," Mark explained, his tone carrying the weary patience of someone dealing with inexplicable female behavior. "She's decided to stop helping with things around here." Emma's expression shifted from confusion to something approaching anger. "Mom stopped helping? What exactly is she supposed to be helping with? This is her house too, isn't it? These are her children too?" The challenge in Emma's voice surprised both Mark and me. Our daughter had always been diplomatic in family conflicts, carefully avoiding taking sides when tension arose between her parents. But something about Mark's characterization of the situation seemed to trigger a protective instinct I hadn't seen before. "Emma, it's complicated," Mark began, but our daughter cut him off with a gesture that reminded me startlingly of myself. "No, Dad, it's not complicated. Mom has been running this family for my entire life while working full-time and somehow making it look effortless. If the house falls apart the moment she stops doing everything, that says something pretty clear about who was actually holding things together." The conversation that followed was uncomfortable but illuminating. Emma had observations about our family dynamics that I'd never considered. Insights from someone who'd grown up watching our marriage from the perspective of a child who was now old enough to recognize patterns and inequities. "Do you know that Mom never missed a single school event for either Tyler or me?" Emma asked Mark directly. "Not one. Even when she had important meetings at work, even when she was sick, even when it meant rearranging her entire schedule. How many of my events did you miss because of work?" Mark's defensive response was predictable but revealing. "Emma, you don't understand the pressure I'm under. My business requires a different kind of commitment than your mother's job. If I don't show up for clients, we lose contracts. If I don't manage projects properly, we lose money. And if Mom doesn't show up for her job, people die," Emma shot back. "She manages life and death decisions every day at the hospital, Dad. But somehow she still found time to be present for our lives in ways that you never did." The argument might have escalated, but my phone rang again with another call that would shift our family's trajectory in ways none of us could have anticipated. This time, the caller was someone whose name I didn't immediately recognize. David Rodriguez from Rodriguez and Associates Legal Services. "Mrs. Mitchell, this is David." "Rodriguez, I represent the law firm handling your Aunt Margaret's estate. Do you have a few minutes to discuss some important matters regarding her will?" Aunt Margaret had been my father's sister, a woman I'd seen perhaps a dozen times throughout my life at family gatherings and holiday celebrations. She'd never married, had no children, and had lived a quiet life in Scottsdale that seemed to revolve around her career as a real estate investor and her extensive volunteer work with literacy programs. She'd passed away 3 weeks earlier, and I'd attended her funeral more out of obligation than genuine grief. "Of course," I said, stepping back onto the patio while Emma and Mark continued their heated discussion in the kitchen. Though I should mention that my aunt and I weren't particularly close. I'm not sure why her estate attorney would need to contact me. "Mrs. Mitchell, I think you'll find that your Aunt Margaret was more aware of your life than you realized. According to her will, you've been named as the primary beneficiary of her estate." The words didn't immediately make sense. "I'm sorry. Could you repeat that?" "Your aunt has left you the majority of her assets, including her real estate portfolio, investment accounts, and personal property. The estate is valued at approximately $8 million. I gripped the patio railing to steady myself, certain I'd misheard or misunderstood something crucial. There must be some mistake. Aunt Margaret barely knew me. We only saw each other at family events. Actually, Mrs. Mitchell, your aunt had been following your life quite closely. She kept detailed records of your career achievements, your children's accomplishments, and your community involvement. Her will includes a personal letter explaining her decision, which I'd like to share with you when we meet to discuss the details. The conversation continued for several more minutes, covering practical matters like probate proceedings and asset transfers, but I absorbed very little of the information. The shock of unexpected wealth was overwhelming enough, but the revelation that a relative I'd considered peripheral had been watching and valuing my life from a distance felt almost surreal. When I ended the call and returned to the kitchen, Emma and Mark were no longer arguing. Instead, they were both staring at me, with expressions of concern and curiosity. "Who was that?" Mark asked. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Aunt Margaret's attorney," I said slowly, still processing the information myself. "Apparently, she left me her estate." "Aunt Margaret?" Mark's forehead creased with confusion. "Your dad's sister? The one who lived in Scottsdale?" "How much?" Emma asked directly, cutting through her father's confusion with the practical question that mattered most. $8 million. The silence that followed was complete and profound. Mark's mouth opened and closed several times without producing sound, while Emma's eyes widened with a mixture of excitement and disbelief. "Holy shit, Mom," Emma breathed, then immediately covered her mouth in embarrassment at her language. Mark's reaction was more complex. I watched his expression cycle through shock, calculation, and what looked distinctly like relief. $8 million? Are you sure? That seems like an enormous amount for someone we barely knew." "Apparently, she knew us better than we realized," I said, thinking about the attorney's comments regarding Aunt Margaret's detailed knowledge of our lives. The implications of this windfall were staggering and immediate. Financial security, beyond anything I'd ever imagined, the ability to pay for Emma's college education without strain, the option to pursue career opportunities based on passion rather than necessity. But perhaps most significantly, the sudden independence that came with substantial personal wealth. For the first time in our marriage, I wouldn't need Mark's income to maintain our lifestyle or support our children's futures. The power dynamic that had defined our relationship for over 2 decades was about to shift dramatically, and I could see the recognition of this reality dawning in Mark's expression. "This changes everything," he said quietly, and I knew he wasn't talking about our financial situation alone. Emma looked between her parents with the sharp intuition of someone who'd grown up watching our marriage navigate various tensions and challenges. "Mom, does this mean you can take that promotion without worrying about Dad's schedule?" The question highlighted something I hadn't yet fully considered. With financial independence came the freedom to make career decisions based purely on professional goals rather than family obligations or financial necessity. I could accept the chief of operations position knowing that our household income wouldn't depend entirely on my ability to balance work demands with home responsibilities. "Yes," I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. "I think it does." Mark's expression suggested he was beginning to understand the broader implications of our changed circumstances. The promotion would likely require longer hours and increased travel, responsibilities that would be difficult to manage if I continued to serve as our family's primary coordinator and caretaker. But with our financial security assured, the burden of providing for our family would no longer fall solely on his shoulders, freeing him to become more present in ways that had previously seemed impossible. Or so I thought at the time. What I didn't yet realize was that financial independence would reveal the true nature of our marriage in ways that no amount of counseling or compromise could have achieved. The inheritance wasn't just money. It was a mirror that would reflect back. The reality of who Mark and I actually were when external pressures and obligations were removed from the equation. The real surprises were still to come. The meeting with David Rodriguez took place in his downtown Phoenix office the following Monday, in a sleek high-rise that offered panoramic views of the Valley of the Sun. I had taken the entire day off from work, ostensibly to prepare for my Tuesday interview for the Chief of Operations position, but really to process the reality of my inheritance and what it might mean for my future. David Rodriguez was a man in his 50s with graying temples and the kind of calm professionalism that inspired confidence. His office was decorated with tasteful Southwestern art and photographs that suggested a long-established practice built on discretion and competence. "Mrs. Mitchell, thank you for coming in so quickly," he said, gesturing toward a comfortable leather chair across from his desk. "I know this must all seem quite sudden and overwhelming." "That's an understatement," I admitted, settling into the chair and trying to project a composure I didn't entirely feel. "I'm still having trouble believing that Aunt Margaret even remembered my name, let alone left me her entire estate." David smiled and retrieved a thick folder from his desk. "Your aunt was an exceptionally observant woman with very strong opinions about family and responsibility. She may not have been physically present in your daily life, but she was remarkably well informed about your circumstances." He opened the folder and pulled out a handwritten letter, the paper thick and expensive, the handwriting unmistakably feminine despite its bold, decisive strokes. "She asked me to share this with you personally when we met to discuss the estate details." I took the letter with trembling fingers, immediately recognizing Aunt Margaret's distinctive penmanship from the birthday cards she'd sent sporadically throughout my childhood. The letter was dated just 3 months before her death, suggesting she'd written it after her cancer diagnosis, but while she was still mentally sharp and physically capable. "My dear Sarah," the letter began, "if you're reading this, then I'm gone and you're probably wondering why a relative you barely knew has turned your life upside down with money you never expected. The truth is, I've been watching your life unfold for years, and I've seen something in you that I don't think you see in yourself." I paused in my reading, looking up at David with confusion. How could she have been watching my life? We only saw each other at family gatherings. "Your aunt hired a private investigator," David explained matter-of-factly. "Not to spy on you in any invasive way, but to keep track of your career progress, your children's achievements, your community involvement. She wanted to understand who you really were beneath the surface of family interactions." The revelation was unsettling, but also strangely touching. I returned to the letter, my curiosity overriding my discomfort with the idea of being unknowingly observed. "I never married or had children," Aunt Margaret's letter continued, "but I've spent my life building something substantial, and I wanted that legacy to go to someone who understood the value of hard work, integrity, and perseverance. Your father's family has always been full of dreamers and talkers, people who have grand plans but lack the discipline to see them through. You're different, Sarah. You build things quietly and maintain them consistently. You show up when others make excuses." The words hit me with unexpected emotional force. Throughout my adult life, I'd often felt invisible, as if my contributions to our family and community were simply expected rather than valued or recognized. To discover that someone had been noticing, documenting, and appreciating my efforts felt like receiving acknowledgement I hadn't realized I desperately needed. "But here's what concerns me," the letter went on, "and why I'm structuring this inheritance the way I am. I've been watching your marriage, Sarah, and I see patterns that remind me of my own mother's life. She spent 40 years accommodating a man who took her sacrifices for granted, who treated her partnership as a service rather than a collaboration. She died exhausted and resentful, having never experienced the independence she deserved." I felt my throat tighten as I read these words, recognizing uncomfortable parallels between Aunt Margaret's description of her mother and my own experiences with Mark. "The money I'm leaving you comes with conditions," the letter continued. "It's structured as separate property, meaning it belongs exclusively to you regardless of your marital status. My attorney will explain the legal details, but the important thing for you to understand is that this inheritance represents freedom. Freedom to make choices based on what you want rather than what you need. Freedom to discover who Sarah Mitchell really is when she's not constantly adapting to someone else's limitations." David cleared his throat gently, drawing my attention back to the present moment. Your aunt was very specific about the inheritance structure. The $2.8 million includes several real estate properties, investment accounts, and a business that she built over 30 years. But more importantly, it's designed to remain completely separate from any marital assets, protected from community property laws, and available to you alone. The implications were staggering. Not only was I suddenly wealthy, but I was wealthy, in a way that couldn't be claimed or controlled by anyone else, including my husband. For the first time in my adult life, I would have financial power that belonged entirely to me. There's more, David continued, pulling additional documents from the folder. Your aunt also established a trust fund for your children's education, separate from the main inheritance. Emma and Tyler will have their college expenses fully covered, plus graduate school if they choose to pursue it. The relief was overwhelming. Emma's tuition payments had been a constant source of stress, requiring careful budgeting and often forcing us to delay other financial goals. Tyler's college expenses had loomed as an even larger concern, given the increasing costs of higher education. To have those worries completely eliminated felt like being released from a weight I'd carried for so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like to breathe freely. What kind of business did she own? I asked, trying to process the practical aspects of my inheritance. Commercial real estate management, David explained. She owned and managed 12 properties throughout the Phoenix metro area, mostly small office buildings and retail spaces. The business generates approximately $300,000 annually in net income, after all expenses and management costs. $300,000 a year. The number was almost incomprehensible to someone whose salary at the hospital, while respectable, had required careful budgeting to support our family's lifestyle. This passive income alone was more than Mark and I earned combined in our best years. Will I need to manage these properties myself? I asked, suddenly aware that inheriting a business meant inheriting responsibilities I might not be equipped to handle. Your aunt worked with a property management company that handles the day-to-day operations, David assured me. You can continue that arrangement, or you can choose to be more hands-on if that interests you. The choice is entirely yours. Entirely yours. The phrase seemed to echo throughout our conversation, highlighting the central theme of Aunt Margaret's IFT. For the first time in decades, I would have choices that belonged completely to me, decisions that didn't require negotiation, compromise, or consideration of someone else's limitations or preferences. We spent the next 2 hours reviewing documents, discussing tax implications, and understanding the various components of my inheritance. By the time I left David's office, I had a comprehensive understanding of my new financial situation and a growing awareness of how dramatically my life was about to change. The drive home through Phoenix's afternoon traffic gave me time to process what had happened and to consider how I would share this information with Mark. Our relationship had already been strained by my withdrawal from household management duties, and I knew that the news of my financial independence would create additional tension. I arrived home to find Mark waiting in the kitchen, his expression a mixture of anxiety and expectation. He'd taken the afternoon off from work, presumably, to discuss our situation and to hear about my meeting with the attorney. "How did it go?" he asked immediately, his voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone trying not to appear too eager for information that could significantly impact his own life. "It's real," I said simply, setting my purse on the counter and taking a moment to gather my thoughts. The inheritance is legitimate and substantial, and it's structured in a way that makes it my separate property. Mark's eyebrows rose at this last detail. Separate property? What does that mean exactly? It means the money belongs to me alone, regardless of our marriage. Community property laws don't apply to inherited assets that are kept separate from marital finances. I watched Mark process this information, his expression shifting as he understood the implications. In our 22 years of marriage, we'd always maintained joint finances, pooling our incomes and making major financial decisions together. The idea of one spouse having substantial independent wealth represented a fundamental change in our relationship dynamics. That seems unnecessary, Mark said finally. We're married, Sarah. What's yours is mine, and what's mine is yours. That's how we've always operated. Is it? I asked, surprised by the sharpness in my own voice. Because I've been thinking about our financial history, Mark, and I'm not sure that's accurate. What do you mean? I mean that when you started your business, you made unilateral decisions about major purchases and investments without consulting me. The new truck, the office expansion, the equipment upgrades, those were all choices you made independently, using our joint resources for your individual business goals. Mark's defensive posture was immediate and familiar. Those were business investments that benefited our whole family. A successful construction company meant better financial security for all of us. And my career? When have my professional goals been considered family investments worthy of joint resources? The question hung between us, highlighting years of prioritization that had favored Mark's ambitions, while treating my career as supplementary income rather than a partnership asset worthy of equal investment and support. That's different, Mark said, but his voice lacked conviction. Your job at the hospital is stable, predictable. You don't need the same kind of capital investment that a construction business requires. I don't need investment because I never asked for it, I replied. I never asked because I knew the answer would be that your business took priority over my advancement. The conversation was interrupted by Tyler's arrival home from school, his usual burst of teenage energy filling the kitchen as he dropped his backpack and immediately began searching through cabinets for snacks. Hey, Mom. Hey, Dad, he said, grabbing an apple and a bag of chips. Why are you both home? Is everything okay? Mark and I exchanged a look, realizing that we hadn't yet discussed how to share news of the inheritance with our children. Tyler's question was innocent, but it highlighted the fact that our family dynamics were shifting in ways that would require explanation and adjustment for everyone. We're having some important family discussions, I said carefully. How was school today? Tyler launched into a detailed account of his chemistry test, his concerns about an upcoming soccer game, and his plans for the weekend, effectively derailing our tense conversation. As I listened to our son's typical teenage chatter, I felt a familiar surge of protective love, mixed with anxiety about how our family changes would affect both him and Emma. After Tyler disappeared upstairs to begin his homework, Mark and I returned to our discussion, but the tone had shifted slightly. The presence of our son, even briefly, had reminded us both that our decisions would impact more than just our marriage. Sarah, I need to understand what you're thinking here, Mark said, his voice softer but still edged with concern. Are you planning to divorce me? Is that what this is about? The directness of his question caught me off guard. I don't know, I answered honestly. A week ago, I would have said no without hesitation. But I'm discovering that I don't really know who I am when I'm not constantly adapting to what everyone else needs from me. What does that mean? It means that for 22 years, I've been Sarah the wife, Sarah the mother, Sarah the employee, Sarah the household manager. I've never just been Sarah, making choices based on what I want rather than what everyone else requires. Mark was quiet for several minutes, apparently processing this perspective. When he spoke again, his voice carried a vulnerability I hadn't heard in years. I love you, Sarah. I know I haven't been the partner you deserved, but I do love you. This inheritance, this new independence, does it mean you don't want to be married to me anymore? The question was fair and heartbreaking, touching on fears that I knew we both shared. The truth was that I didn't yet know the answer. The version of myself that was emerging as I stepped back from my traditional roles felt unfamiliar and unpredictable, even to me. I don't know if I want to be married to the version of us that we've become, I said finally. But I also don't know if there's a different version possible, or if you'd want that version if it existed. What would that different version look like? It was a good question, one that I'd been contemplating since my decision to stop managing everyone else's responsibilities. It would look like actual partnership, shared responsibility for our children's daily needs, not just the fun parts, equal engagement with the boring, repetitive tasks that keep a household functioning, recognition that my career and goals matter as much as yours do. I can do that, Mark said quickly. Sarah, I can learn to be more engaged, more helpful around the house. It's not about being helpful, Mark. Helpful implies that these responsibilities belong to me and you're assisting out of kindness. I'm talking about shared ownership of our family's needs. The distinction seemed to confuse him, highlighting how deeply ingrained our traditional patterns had become. Mark genuinely believed that his occasional assistance with household tasks constituted partnership, unable to see the difference between helping with my responsibilities and sharing responsibility equally. Our conversation was interrupted again, this time by my phone ringing with a call from Jennifer Adams at the hospital. Sarah, I hope I'm not calling at a bad time. Jennifer's voice carried the brisk efficiency that characterized all her professional communications. I wanted to confirm your interview tomorrow and share some additional information about the position. Of course, I said, stepping into our home office for privacy. What additional information? The board is also considering this position as a potential stepping stone to Chief Executive Officer when Dr. Williams retires in 3 years. Obviously, that's not a guarantee, but they want candidates who would be interested in that level of responsibility and advancement. Chief Executive Officer. The possibility seemed almost surreal, representing a level of professional achievement I'd never seriously considered within my reach. That's certainly something I'd be interested in exploring, I managed, trying to sound more composed than I felt. Excellent. I should also mention that the operations position will likely require some travel. Site visits to our satellite facilities, conference attendance, collaboration with other hospital systems. The travel wouldn't be excessive, but it would be regular. After ending the call, I remained in the office for several minutes, contemplating how this career opportunity intersected with my newfound financial independence and the uncertain future of my marriage. With Aunt Margaret's inheritance, I wouldn't need to consider salary or benefits when making career decisions. I could accept or decline the promotion based purely on professional interest and personal fulfillment. The freedom was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. When I returned to the kitchen, Mark was loading the dishwasher with the same careful attention I'd noticed over the past week. His efforts to step up household responsibilities were genuine, but they felt more like penance than partnership, driven by crisis rather than authentic engagement. That was Jennifer from work, I explained. The interview tomorrow is for a bigger opportunity than I initially understood. They're considering the position as preparation for a potential CEO role in a few years. Mark's reaction was complex, pride mixed with concern, excitement tempered by the practical recognition that my success would further shift the balance of power in our relationship. That's incredible, Sarah. You deserve that kind of recognition. It would mean more travel, longer hours, increased responsibilities. I can handle things here, Mark said quickly. With Tyler, with the house. I can learn to manage the things you've always done. The offer was generous but highlighted the fundamental misunderstanding that continued to characterize our relationship. Mark was still thinking in terms of temporary adjustment, assuming that my withdrawal from household management was a phase that would eventually return to normal once our marriage stabilized. Mark, I'm not planning to return to managing everyone else's lives, I said gently. The version of me that did everything while you focused on your business is gone. If we're going to stay married, it has to be as genuine partners, not as roommates with assigned roles. I understand that, he insisted. I'm ready to be more involved, more present. Are you ready to be involved even if it means compromising? Your business goals, Are you ready to miss client meetings when Tyler has important events? Are you ready to turn down profitable projects if they conflict with family obligations? The questions seemed to catch Mark off guard, forcing him to confront the practical implications of genuine partnership. Throughout our marriage, his business had always taken priority over family commitments, with my flexibility and availability serving as the foundation that made his single-minded focus possible. "Those are big changes," he admitted finally. "Yes, they are, and I'm not sure you really want to make them, which is why I can't promise that I want to stay married to who we've been." The honesty was brutal but necessary. For too many years, we'd avoided direct conversations about the fundamental inequities in our relationship, choosing temporary fixes and surface compromises over genuine examination of our core dynamics. Tuesday morning arrived with the oppressive heat that characterized Phoenix summers, the kind of weather that made any outdoor activity feel punishing before 8 in the morning. I dressed carefully for my interview, choosing a professional suit that projected competence without ostentation, and arrived at the hospital 30 minutes early to review my notes and center myself mentally. The interview panel consisted of 4 people: Dr. Williams, the current CEO, Dr. Mitchell, the Chief Medical Officer, Board Member Patricia Hernandez, and Dr. Morrison, the retiring Chief of Operations whose position I was hoping to fill. The conference room overlooked the hospital's main campus, providing a view of the bustling activity that characterized one of Phoenix's largest medical centers. "Sarah, thank you for taking the time to interview for this position," Dr. Williams began, his warm smile immediately putting me at ease. "We're excited to learn more about your vision for hospital operations and your thoughts on healthcare management in an evolving industry." What followed was 90 minutes of the most professionally stimulating conversation I'd had in years. We discussed patient flow optimization, staff retention strategies, technology integration, and the complex balance between operational efficiency and quality patient care. I found myself drawing on years of accumulated knowledge and experience, presenting ideas and insights that I'd developed but never had the opportunity to share at this level. "Your work on emergency department efficiency has been remarkable," Dr. Mitchell commented. "The 30% reduction in wait times has had ripple effects throughout our entire system. How would you scale those principles to other departments?" I outlined a comprehensive approach to systematic analysis and improvement, explaining how the same data-driven methodologies could be applied to surgical scheduling, lab processing, and patient discharge procedures. The panel's engagement was evident, their questions probing and thoughtful, their responses suggesting genuine interest in my perspectives. "We should discuss the CEO trajectory that Jennifer mentioned," Dr. Williams said toward the end of our conversation. "This position would provide exposure to board governance, strategic planning, and system-wide decision-making. Are you interested in that level of responsibility?" "Absolutely," I replied without hesitation. "I've spent my career focused on operational details, but I'm ready for broader impact and strategic thinking." The transition would likely involve additional education, an executive MBA or healthcare administration certification. The hospital would support that professional development, but it would require significant time commitment on your part. Additional education, increased responsibilities, strategic leadership, everything about this opportunity aligned with ambitions I'd suppressed for years while prioritizing family stability and Mark's business growth. "I'm very interested in pursuing whatever education and development the role requires," I assured them. The interview concluded with discussions of salary, benefits, and timeline. The compensation package was substantial, representing a 40% increase over my current salary, plus comprehensive benefits and professional development opportunities. Even without Aunt Margaret's inheritance, this position would have provided financial security beyond anything I'd previously experienced. With the inheritance, it represented something even more valuable: the freedom to pursue professional goals, based purely on passion and ambition rather than financial necessity. I left the hospital feeling energized and optimistic in ways I'd forgotten were possible. The interview had reminded me of aspects of myself that had been dormant for years. Intellectual curiosity, strategic thinking, leadership potential that extended beyond household management and family coordination. On the drive home, I made a decision that surprised me with its clarity and certainty. Regardless of what happened with my marriage, regardless of Mark's ability or willingness to change, I was going to accept this position if it was offered. For the first time in my adult life, I was going to make a major decision based entirely on what I wanted rather than what everyone else needed from me. The realization felt like stepping into sunlight after years in shadow, and I knew there would be no going back to the person I'd been before this week changed everything. The call came Wednesday afternoon while I was reviewing quarterly budget reports in my office at Desert Valley Medical Center. Jennifer's voice carried an excitement that immediately captured my attention, cutting through the routine paperwork that usually occupied my late afternoons. "Sarah, I have excellent news," she announced without preamble. "The board unanimously approved your appointment as Chief of Hospital Operations. Dr. Williams wants to meet with you Friday to discuss your transition timeline and immediate priorities." The triumph felt surreal, a validation of capabilities I'd possessed but never fully recognized. "Thank you, Jennifer. This is incredibly exciting." "There's more. The board was so impressed with your interview that they've already begun preliminary discussions about the CEO development track. They want to fast-track your executive education, starting with a healthcare leadership program at Northwestern University this fall." After ending the call, I sat in my office watching the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the medical center campus, trying to process how dramatically my professional life was about to change. In the span of a week, I'd gone from feeling invisible and undervalued to being offered opportunities that represented everything I'd secretly hoped for but never dared to pursue. The irony wasn't lost on me that this professional breakthrough was occurring simultaneously with the collapse of my personal life. As my career prospects soared, my marriage was disintegrating, revealing fundamental incompatibilities that had been masked by years of accommodation and compromise. I drove home through Phoenix's evening traffic with a mixture of elation and apprehension, knowing that sharing my good news with Mark would force us to confront questions we'd been avoiding. The promotion would require longer hours, increased travel, and a level of professional commitment that would make it impossible for me to continue serving as our family's primary coordinator and caretaker. I found Mark in the garage, methodically, organizing tools with the same careful attention he'd been applying to household tasks since my withdrawal from domestic management. His business clothes were replaced by old jeans and a paint-stained t-shirt, and there was something almost desperate about his focus on these previously neglected projects. "How was your day?" he asked, looking up from a toolbox he was reorganizing with unnecessary precision. "I got the promotion," I announced, watching his face carefully for genuine reaction beneath the expected congratulations. Mark's smile was immediate but complex, carrying pride mixed with concern. "Sarah, that's fantastic. Really fantastic. You deserve this recognition." "Thank you. It's going to mean significant changes in our daily routine, though. Longer hours, regular travel, executive education programs that will require extended absences." "I can handle things here," Mark said quickly, the same automatic response he'd been offering since our crisis began. "Whatever you need to do for your career, I'll manage the household responsibilities." The offer was generous but revealed his continued misunderstanding of our situation. Mark was still thinking in terms of temporary role reversal, assuming that my professional advancement was a phase that would eventually stabilize into a new version of our traditional arrangement. "Mark, I need you to understand something important," I said, leaning against his workbench. "I'm not asking you to temporarily cover my responsibilities while I focus on my career. I'm saying that our old dynamic is permanently over. We either figure out how to be genuine partners, or we figure out how to be divorced." The bluntness of my statement seemed to catch him off guard. For several moments, he continued sorting screwdrivers with mechanical precision, avoiding eye contact while processing what I'd said. "You're serious about divorce?" he asked finally, his voice carrying a vulnerability that reminded me of the young man I'd married 22 years earlier. "I'm serious about not returning to a marriage where I'm responsible for everyone else's happiness while my own needs remain invisible," I replied. "If that means divorce, then yes, I'm serious about divorce." Mark set down the tools and faced me directly, his expression shifting to something approaching desperation. "Sarah, what do you need from me? Tell me specifically what you want, and I'll do it. I'll change whatever you need me to change." The question was both heartbreaking and revealing. After more than 2 decades of marriage, Mark still didn't understand that genuine partnership couldn't be achieved through assigned tasks and behavioral modifications. He was treating our relationship crisis like a business problem that could be solved through better project management. "I need you to want to be present in our family's life, not just willing to be present when I point out what needs to be done," I explained. "I need you to care about Tyler's chemistry grade and Emma's job interview anxiety and whether we have groceries in the refrigerator, not because I've asked you to care, but because these things matter to you independently." "They do matter to me," Mark protested. "You know I love our children. Loving them and being present for their daily lives are different things. You love the idea of being a good father, but you've never engaged with the actual work of parenting, beyond showing up for games and special occasions." The conversation was interrupted by Tyler's arrival home from soccer practice, his usual burst of teenage energy filling the garage as he dropped his equipment bag and immediately began searching for something in the organized chaos of sporting goods and yard tools. "Hey, Dad, have you seen my backup cleats?" Tyler asked, rifling through boxes with the casual confidence of someone who expected his needs to be accommodated immediately. "Check the blue storage bin by the bicycles," Mark replied, then paused as he realized he had no idea whether Tyler actually had backup cleats or why he might need them. "Are your regular cleats damaged?" I asked, recognizing this as one of those small crises that could derail practice preparation if not addressed quickly. "The sole is coming loose on the left one," Tyler explained, holding up the offending shoe. "Coach says we can't play in unsafe equipment, so I need the backups for practice tomorrow." "When did this happen?" Mark asked, studying the damaged cleat with the concentration of someone trying to understand how he'd missed important information. "A couple days ago. I meant to tell someone, but I forgot until today." In our previous dynamic, I would have immediately begun problem solving, calling sporting goods stores to check availability, rearranging my schedule to accommodate shopping trips, and ensuring that Tyler had proper equipment for practice. Instead, I looked expectantly at Mark, curious to see how he would handle this typical family logistics challenge. "I can take you shopping tomorrow after school," Mark offered, but uncertainty colored his voice. "Do you know what kind of cleats you need?" Tyler launched into a detailed explanation of size, brand preferences, and league requirements, information that highlighted the complex considerations involved in even simple purchases for active teenagers. I watched Mark's expression as he absorbed details about equipment specifications that I'd been managing for years without conscious thought. "This is more complicated than I realized," Mark admitted after Tyler disappeared into the house with his backup cleats. "How do you keep track of all these requirements and preferences and schedules?" "Practice," I said simply. "Years of paying attention to details that seemed insignificant until they became urgent." The incident was minor, but illustrative of the vast gap between Mark's perception of family management and its reality. He'd observed the smooth operation of our household, without recognizing the constant attention and anticipation required to maintain that efficiency. Thursday evening brought an unexpected visitor that would shift our family dynamics in ways none of us anticipated. Emma arrived home from college without advance notice, her car loaded with belongings that suggested more than a casual visit. "I'm taking a gap semester," she announced, setting multiple suitcases in our foyer with the determined expression of someone who'd made a difficult decision after careful consideration. "I need some time to figure out what I actually want to study instead of what I think I should study." Mark's reaction was immediate alarm. "Emma, you can't just drop out of college. Your education is too important to interrupt on a whim." "It's not a whim, Dad," Emma replied, her tone carrying the sharp edge of someone whose decisions had been questioned without being understood. "I've been struggling with anxiety and academic pressure for months. I need time to work, to gain some real-world experience, to figure out my own goals instead of just meeting everyone else's expectations." The conversation that followed revealed layers of stress and uncertainty that Emma had been concealing behind her academic achievements and cheerful family interactions. She'd been feeling overwhelmed by the pressure to choose a major, maintain perfect grades, and justify the significant financial investment of her education. "Why didn't you tell us you were struggling?" I asked, sitting beside her on our living room couch while Mark paced anxiously behind us. "Because you and Dad have enough stress with your own problems," Emma said quietly. "I didn't want to add my confusion to whatever's happening between you two." The admission was heartbreaking, highlighting how our marital tensions had created an environment where our children felt responsible for protecting us from additional concerns. Emma had been silently managing her own crisis while trying not to burden parents who seemed overwhelmed by their own challenges. "Emma, your well-being is more important than any other stress in our lives," I assured her. "We want to support you through this, not add pressure." "What kind of work are you thinking about?" Mark asked, his tone suggesting he was struggling to adjust his expectations from college graduation to gap-year employment. "Actually, I've already found something," Emma said, brightening slightly. "There's a nonprofit organization downtown that provides literacy support for adult learners. They offered me a position coordinating their volunteer tutoring program." The job was perfect for Emma's temperament and interests, combining her natural empathy with organizational skills that reminded me strongly of myself at her age. But I could see Mark calculating the financial implications of college interruption and entry-level nonprofit wages. "That sounds like meaningful work," I said, ignoring Mark's concerned expression. "What drew you to literacy education?" Emma's explanation revealed a passion for community service and social justice that had been developing throughout her college experience, but had been overshadowed by academic pressure and career uncertainty. As she described the organization's mission and her planned responsibilities, I saw glimpses of the confident, purposeful young woman she was becoming when freed from external expectations. "I think a gap semester sounds like excellent timing," I said finally, surprising both Emma and Mark with my enthusiastic support. "You can live here, save money, gain work experience, and figure out your academic goals without financial pressure." Mark's expression suggested he wanted to object, but was uncertain how to argue against my reasoning. In our traditional dynamic, he would have expected me to share his concerns about interrupted education and delayed career development. My support for Emma's unconventional choice highlighted another way that my changing perspective was disrupting our family's established patterns. "Are you sure this is wise?" Mark asked later, after Emma had gone upstairs to unpack her belongings. "College interruptions can become permanent. What if she never goes back? What if she does go back with better understanding of what she wants to study and why?" I countered. "Emma is intelligent and motivated. A year of real-world experience might give her insights that will make her remaining college years more focused and valuable. But the timing is terrible. With everything else that's changing in our family, adding Emma's academic uncertainty seems like poor planning." The comment revealed Mark's continued focus on external stability rather than individual growth and self-discovery. He was more concerned with maintaining predictable timelines than supporting Emma's emotional well-being and personal development. "Sometimes life doesn't follow convenient timelines," I replied. Emma needs our support for her decisions, not our anxiety about how those decisions affect our family planning. Friday morning brought my transition meeting with Dr. Williams, a conversation that would solidify my new professional identity and establish expectations for my expanded responsibilities. His office was located on the executive floor of the medical center, with panoramic views of Phoenix's downtown skyline and decor that projected both medical professionalism and approachable leadership. "Sarah, congratulations again on your appointment," Dr. Williams began, gesturing toward a comfortable seating area away from his formal desk. "I wanted to discuss your transition timeline and share some thoughts about your development trajectory." We spent an hour reviewing the operational challenges facing the hospital system, discussing strategic priorities, and outlining my immediate responsibilities. Dr. Williams's confidence in my capabilities was evident, but so was his recognition that this role would require significant personal and professional adjustment. "The executive education program at Northwestern begins in September," he explained. "It's an intensive 6-week residential program, followed by quarterly weekend sessions throughout the year. The hospital will cover all expenses and provide salary continuation, but it represents a substantial time commitment. 6 weeks away from home during the fall, plus regular travel for continuing education. The requirements would have been impossible to consider when I was responsible for managing every aspect of our family's daily life. With Emma home and my household duties redistributed, the opportunity felt challenging but achievable." "I'm very interested in the program," I assured him. "When would you need confirmation of my participation?" "Within the next 2 weeks. We also need to discuss your current caseload transition and identify interim coverage for your departure." The practical details of professional advancement felt surreal after years of career decisions based primarily on family logistics and financial necessity. For the first time, I was planning professional development without considering whether Mark's schedule could accommodate additional childcare responsibilities or whether our budget could absorb travel expenses. "There's one more thing," Dr. Williams added as our meeting concluded. "The board has asked me to share their long-term vision for your role here. Assuming successful completion of the executive program and strong performance in the operations position, they'd like you to consider Chief Executive Officer candidacy when I retire in 3 years." The possibility of leading one of Phoenix's largest hospital systems seemed almost fantastical, representing a level of professional achievement I'd never seriously contemplated. But sitting in Dr. Williams' office, discussing strategic vision and organizational leadership, the goal felt not only possible, but inevitable. "That would be an incredible opportunity," I managed, trying to project composure while mentally processing the magnitude of what he was suggesting. "You have the analytical skills, the operational experience, and the leadership potential," Dr. Williams continued. "The executive education program will provide the strategic thinking framework and healthcare policy knowledge you'll need for system-wide leadership." I left the medical center feeling professionally validated in ways I'd never experienced, with clear pathways to advancement that aligned perfectly with ambitions I was just beginning to acknowledge. The contrast with my personal life couldn't have been more stark. As my career prospects soared, my marriage was disintegrating, revealing fundamental incompatibilities that no amount of compromise seemed capable of bridging. That evening, I found Mark waiting in our kitchen with an expression of determined resolve that immediately captured my attention. He'd obviously been preparing for a serious conversation, with notes written on a legal pad and our family calendar spread across the granite countertop. "I've been thinking about our situation," he began without preamble, "about what you said regarding genuine partnership and shared responsibility. I want to propose a specific plan for how we can restructure our marriage." The legal pad contained a detailed list of household responsibilities, childcare duties, and family obligations, meticulously divided into columns labeled Mark and Sarah. He'd clearly spent considerable time analyzing our domestic operations and attempting to create equitable distribution of tasks and responsibilities. "I can handle Tyler's daily schedule," Mark explained, pointing to his notes. School pickups, practice transportation, homework supervision, medical appointments. I can also manage grocery shopping, meal planning, and kitchen maintenance. The proposal was comprehensive and thoughtful, representing genuine effort to understand the scope of responsibilities I'd been managing independently. But something about his approach felt fundamentally misguided, as if he was treating our marriage like a business partnership that could be optimized through better task allocation. Mark, I appreciate the effort you've put into this analysis, I said carefully. But I think you're still missing the point of what partnership means. His confusion was evident. What do you mean? I've identified specific responsibilities that I can take over completely. You wouldn't need to manage or supervise these areas at all. Partnership isn't about dividing tasks like roommates sharing chores, I explained. It's about shared investment in our family's well-being, shared awareness of our children's needs, shared responsibility for creating the kind of home and family life we want. But that's exactly what I'm proposing, Mark insisted. Complete. Responsibility for specific areas, with clear boundaries and expectations. The conversation continued for over an hour, with Mark presenting detailed schedules and Emma occasionally joining to offer perspectives on our family dynamics that surprised both her parents with their insight and maturity. What became clear was that Mark was genuinely committed to change, but was approaching our relationship problems with the same project management mentality that had characterized his business success. Dad, I think what Mom is trying to say is, that love can't be scheduled, Emma interjected during a particularly circular discussion about household management. You're treating our family like a construction project that needs better organization, but families are more complicated than that. Emma's observation was astute and painful, highlighting the emotional disconnection that underlay our practical disagreements. Mark's willingness to assume additional responsibilities was genuine, but his approach suggested he still didn't understand that partnership required emotional investment rather than just behavioral modification. I don't know how to be different than I am, Mark said finally, his voice carrying a weariness that reminded me of our early marriage when we'd believed that love and good intentions were sufficient to overcome any obstacle. Maybe that's the real issue, I replied gently. Maybe we've both changed in ways that make us incompatible, regardless of our good intentions or shared history. The admission hung between us like a door closing, acknowledging a possibility that neither of us had been willing to voice directly. After 22 years of marriage, we might simply be different people who wanted different things from life, partnership, and family. Sunday afternoon brought an unexpected visitor who would provide perspective that none of us had anticipated. Dr. Patricia Green called to request an emergency session, explaining that she'd been reflecting on our previous meetings and wanted to discuss some concerns about her therapeutic approach. I owe you both an apology, Dr. Green began as Mark and I settled into her office's familiar beige chairs. I've been reviewing our sessions, and I realized that I made some significant errors in my assessment of your marital dynamics. Mark and I exchanged surprised glances. In our experience, therapists rarely admitted mistakes or revised their professional opinions so dramatically. What kind of errors? I asked, curious despite my growing skepticism about the value of marriage counseling for our particular situation. I focused on adjusting your expectations rather than examining whether those expectations were reasonable, Dr. Green explained, addressing me directly. I treated your requests for partnership as excessive demands rather than legitimate needs for equity in your marriage. The admission was validating, but also frustrating, coming weeks after her professional opinion had influenced my decision to withdraw from family management and had contributed to Mark's belief that my demands were unreasonable. What changed your perspective? Mark asked, his tone suggesting he was struggling to adjust his understanding of our situation based on this professional reversal. I consulted with colleagues about your case, Dr. Green admitted. Several. Other therapists pointed out that I was applying outdated models of marriage therapy that assumed traditional gender roles rather than examining individual needs and contributions objectively. She went on to explain that her initial assessment had been influenced by unconscious biases about marriage and family responsibilities, leading her to pathologize my needs for partnership rather than examining the fundamental inequities in our relationship. "Sarah, your expectations were entirely reasonable," Dr. Green said directly. "You were asking for basic partnership and emotional labor distribution that should be standard in any healthy marriage." The validation felt both wonderful and infuriating. Wonderful because it confirmed that my needs hadn't been excessive or unrealistic. Infuriating because professional confirmation came too late to prevent the crisis that had already fundamentally altered our family dynamics. "Where does that leave us now?" Mark asked, clearly struggling to process this dramatic revision of expert opinion. "That depends on whether both of you are willing to do the difficult work of rebuilding your partnership from the foundation up," Dr. Green replied. "Mark, are you prepared to fundamentally change your approach to marriage and family responsibility, not just temporarily, but permanently?" Mark's hesitation was brief but telling. "I want to save our marriage," he said finally. "But I'm not sure I know how to be the person Sarah needs me to be." The honesty was painful, but appreciated. After weeks of promises and behavioral modifications, Mark was finally acknowledging that our problems extended beyond task distribution and household management. "Sarah, are you willing to work toward rebuilding your marriage if Mark demonstrates genuine change, or have you already decided that divorce is inevitable?" Dr. Green asked. The question required a level of self-examination that I'd been avoiding. My growing financial independence and professional advancement had made divorce seem not only possible, but potentially preferable to continued compromise and accommodation. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "I'm discovering aspects of myself that have been dormant for years. I'm not sure the person I'm becoming is compatible with any version of our marriage." Dr. Green nodded as if this response was both expected and healthy. "That's a legitimate concern and an important realization. Personal growth sometimes reveals fundamental incompatibilities that can't be resolved through behavioral changes alone." The session concluded with homework assignments focused on individual self-examination rather than relationship repair, acknowledging that our marriage couldn't be fixed until we both understood who we actually were as individuals rather than who we'd been trying to be for each other. Driving home separately, I reflected on how Dr. Green's apology had highlighted the broader theme of my recent experiences. Professional validation, financial independence, and career advancement were all confirming capabilities and ambitions that had been invisible or dismissed for years. The question now was whether this emerging version of myself could coexist with any form of marriage to Mark, or whether authentic self-discovery required complete independence. The answer would become clear sooner than I expected, through revelations that would surprise everyone involved, including Dr. Patricia Green herself. The revelation came on a Tuesday morning in late June, when Phoenix's summer heat had already made outdoor activities unbearable before sunrise. I was reviewing transition documents for my new role as Chief of Hospital Operations when my phone rang with a call from an unknown number with a familiar area code. "Mrs. Mitchell? This is Detective Maria Santos with the Phoenix Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit. I need to speak with you about your husband's business activities." The words sent an immediate chill through me despite the early morning heat. "What kind of business activities?" "Ma'am, I'd prefer to discuss this in person. Are you available to come to the station this morning? Or would you prefer that I come to your workplace?" 2 hours later, I sat in a sterile conference room at the police station, surrounded by boxes of documents and financial records that Detective Santos had been investigating for the past 6 months. The scope of Mark's fraudulent activities was staggering in both complexity and duration. "Your husband has been operating an elaborate billing scheme for the past 3 years, Detective Santos explained, spreading invoices and contracts across The conference table. He's been inflating material costs, charging for work never performed, and billing clients for premium materials while using substandard substitutes. The evidence was comprehensive and damning. Mark had systematically defrauded clients of over $800,000, using sophisticated accounting methods to conceal the theft from both customers and his business partner, Steve. More shocking still, he'd been using our joint bank accounts to launder the stolen money, depositing fraudulent payments and then transferring funds through a complex series of accounts to obscure their illegal origin. Are you saying that money in our joint accounts came from criminal activity? I asked, struggling to process the implications for my own financial situation. A significant portion, yes. We've been tracking these transactions for months, building a case that will likely result in federal charges for wire fraud, money laundering, and racketeering. The detective's next revelation was even more devastating. Mrs. Mitchell, we have evidence that your husband has been planning to flee the country. He's obtained false identification documents and opened accounts in offshore banks. We believe he was preparing to disappear with the stolen money, leaving his victims and family behind. The room seemed to spin around me as I absorbed this information. The man I'd been married to for 22 years, the father of my children, had been living a double life as a sophisticated criminal who was prepared to abandon everything for money he'd stolen from innocent people. When are you planning to arrest him? I managed to ask. Today. We have warrants for his arrest and seizure of all business and personal assets connected to the fraud. That includes your joint accounts, your home, and any property purchased with commingled funds. The practical implications were immediate and overwhelming. Our house, our cars, our savings accounts, everything we'd built together over 2 decades would be frozen as evidence in a criminal investigation. Without Aunt Margaret's inheritance, I would have been facing financial devastation alongside the emotional trauma of discovering my husband's criminal activities. Detective Santos, I need you to understand that I had no knowledge of these activities, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. I work at Desert Valley Medical Center as a hospital administrator. I've never been involved in Mark's business operations. We understand that, Mrs. Mitchell. Our investigation found no evidence of your participation in the fraud. However, you'll need to cooperate with our investigation and may be called as a witness when this goes to trial. I spent the next 4 hours providing statements, reviewing financial documents, and trying to separate my legitimate assets from those connected to Mark's criminal enterprise. The inheritance from Aunt Margaret, structured as separate property and deposited in accounts, opened after her death, was protected from seizure. My salary, my personal credit cards, and my retirement accounts were also secure, but everything else, our home, our joint savings, our shared credit lines, would be frozen pending resolution of the criminal case. Mrs. Mitchell, I need to ask you to return home and act normally until we execute the arrest warrant this afternoon, Detective Santos instructed. Don't inform your husband about our investigation or take any actions that might alert him to our plans. The drive home through Phoenix's afternoon traffic gave me time to process what had happened and to consider how I would share this information with Mark. Our relationship had already been strained by my withdrawal from household management duties, and I knew that the news of my financial independence would create additional tension. Mark was in our kitchen when I arrived, sitting at the granite island with his laptop and a stack of invoices, apparently conducting normal business activities while planning international flight from federal prosecution. He looked up with the casual smile I'd known for 22 years, completely unaware that his criminal enterprise was about to collapse around him. "How was your morning?" he asked, the routine question carrying new sinister undertones given what I now knew about his secret life. "Productive," I replied, marveling at my ability to maintain normal conversation while processing the enormity of his deception. "How's your day going?" "Busy. Steve and I are finalizing the Johnson project, and I have 3 potential clients coming in this afternoon for estimates." The casual mention of Steve sent a fresh wave of concern through me. Did Mark's business partner know about the fraud, or was he another victim of Mark's elaborate deception? Would Steve's life be destroyed alongside Mark's when the arrests occurred? "Mark, can I ask you something?" I said, sitting across from him at the island where we'd shared thousands of meals and conversations over the years. "If you could change anything about our life together, what would it be?" The question seemed to catch him off guard, his expression shifting from casual attention to something more thoughtful and vulnerable. "I wish I'd been better at showing you how much I appreciated everything you did for our family," he said finally. "I know I took you for granted, expected you to handle things that should have been our shared responsibility." The irony was overwhelming. Here was Mark, expressing genuine remorse for marital neglect while simultaneously preparing to flee the country after defrauding hundreds of thousands of dollars from innocent clients. His capacity for compartmentalization was both impressive and terrifying. "Do you love me, Mark?" I asked directly, needing to understand whether any aspect of our relationship had been authentic. "Of course I love you," he replied without hesitation. "Sarah, everything I've done has been for our family, to provide security and opportunities for you and the kids. Everything I've done." The phrase would prove prophetic in ways Mark couldn't have anticipated. At 3:47 p.m., multiple police vehicles surrounded our house with the swift efficiency of a coordinated operation. I watched from our living room window as Detective Santos and her team approached our front door, knowing that the next few minutes would permanently alter not just my marriage but my entire understanding of the man I'd shared my life with for over 2 decades. The arrest was swift and professional. Mark's shock was immediate and genuine, his protests of innocence delivered with convincing sincerity to the officers who read him his rights. As they led him away in handcuffs, he looked back at me with an expression of betrayal and confusion, as if I had orchestrated his downfall rather than simply been present when his criminal activities finally caught up with him. "Sarah, this is all a misunderstanding," he called out as the officers guided him toward their vehicle. "Don't let them freeze our accounts. Call my attorney. Take care of Tyler." The requests were practical and reasonable, the kind of instructions any innocent spouse might give under similar circumstances, but I knew what Mark didn't yet realize, that his attorney would soon abandon him when the scope of evidence became clear, that our accounts were already frozen, and that Tyler's well-being would depend entirely on assets Mark had never been able to touch or control. Emma arrived home 20 minutes after the police departed, her face pale with shock as she absorbed the crime scene tape and official notices posted on our front door. Tyler was still at soccer practice, unaware that his father had been arrested for federal crimes that would likely result in decades of imprisonment. "Mom, what happened? Why are there police cars here?" Emma asked, her voice carrying the controlled panic of someone trying to remain calm in an unprecedented crisis. I explained the situation as gently as possible, watching my daughter's expression shift from confusion to disbelief to anger as she processed the reality of her father's criminal activities and abandonment plans. "He was going to leave us?" Emma asked, her voice breaking slightly. "He was going to take stolen money and disappear, leaving us to deal with the consequences?" "It appears so," I confirmed, holding her as she began to cry with the raw grief of someone whose fundamental understanding of a parent had been shattered. Tyler's return from practice 2 hours later required a different approach. At 16, he was old enough to understand the legal implications, but young enough to be devastated by the destruction of his idealized image of his father. The conversation was one of the most difficult of my parenting experience. Watching my son's face crumble as I explained that his father was in jail, our house was seized, and our family as he'd known it was permanently over. "But Dad's a good person," Tyler protested, his voice carrying the desperate confusion of adolescent cognitive dissonance. "He comes to my games. He helps with my homework. Good people don't do things like this." "People are complicated, honey," I said gently. "Your father loves you very much, but he made choices that hurt a lot of people, including our family. The next several days passed in a blur of legal consultations, media attention, and practical adjustments that would have been overwhelming without the financial security of Aunt Margaret's inheritance. Mark's arrest had made local news, with reporters camping outside our house and photographers capturing images of crime scene tape surrounding what had appeared to be a successful suburban family home. Steve Harrison, Mark's business partner, was arrested 2 days later as investigators discovered his full participation in the fraud scheme. The construction company that had employed dozens of workers and completed hundreds of projects was immediately shut down, leaving clients with unfinished homes and employees without jobs or benefits. The ripple effects of Mark's criminal activities extended far beyond our family, destroying the livelihoods and dreams of countless innocent people. Mark's first court appearance was scheduled for the following Monday, and I surprised myself by deciding to attend. Emma chose to accompany me, while Tyler remained at home with Lisa Chen, my friend who had become an invaluable source of practical and emotional support during this crisis. Seeing Mark in an orange jumpsuit, shackled and flanked by public defenders, was a jarring reminder of how completely our lives had changed. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by circumstances that had stripped away the confidence and authority that had defined his public persona. When he spotted Emma and me in the courtroom gallery, his expression shifted through multiple emotions: relief at seeing familiar faces, shame at being seen in these circumstances, and something that looked almost like hope, as if our presence suggested forgiveness or at least continued loyalty. The proceedings were brief and formal, with prosecutors outlining charges that included wire fraud, money laundering, racketeering, and conspiracy. The evidence against Mark was overwhelming, with recorded conversations, financial records, and testimony from multiple victims creating an airtight case for conviction. The defendant systematically defrauded clients over a period of 3 years, the prosecutor explained to the judge. He used sophisticated methods to conceal his crimes and was actively planning to flee the country when arrested. The total amount stolen exceeds $800,000, with victims including elderly retirees, young families, and small business owners. Mark's attorney, an overworked public defender who had clearly inherited an impossible case, attempted to argue for reasonable bail and home confinement pending trial. But the prosecution's evidence of flight risk, combined with the severity of the charges, resulted in Mark being remanded to custody without bail. As guards led Mark away after the hearing, he looked directly at me with an expression that conveyed both desperation and expectation. I realized he was waiting for some sign of support, some indication that I would stand by him through this legal nightmare, just as I had supported him through every other challenge in our marriage. I remained seated, my hands folded in my lap, offering neither encouragement nor condemnation. The woman who had accommodated and enabled for 22 years was gone, replaced by someone who understood that loyalty had limits and that some betrayals were unforgivable. Emma and I left the courthouse in silence, both processing the finality of what we'd witnessed. Our family's patriarch was facing decades in federal prison. Our financial security depended entirely on assets he'd never controlled, and our future required rebuilding from a foundation that no longer included the man who had been central to our lives for over 2 decades. "Mom, are you okay?" Emma asked as we sat in my car in the courthouse parking lot, neither of us quite ready to return to our dramatically altered reality. "I'm better than okay," I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. For the first time in years, I know exactly who I am and what I want. The weeks that followed Mark's arrest brought a series of revelations that painted an even more disturbing picture of the man I'd married. Federal investigators uncovered evidence that Mark's criminal activities extended back much further than initially suspected, with fraudulent practices dating to the early years of his business. More shocking still, they discovered that Mark had maintained multiple online identities, engaged in cryptocurrency speculation with stolen funds, and had been communicating with criminal organizations about money laundering opportunities. Dr. Patricia Green called to request an emergency session, explaining that she wanted to discuss how Mark's arrest affected her understanding of our marriage and her previous therapeutic recommendations. "Sarah, I owe you a profound apology," Dr. Green began, as I settled into her office chair for what I expected to be our final session. "Everything I told you about adjusting your expectations was not just wrong, but potentially dangerous." "What do you mean dangerous?" "You were living with a man who was capable of elaborate deception, criminal activity, and planned abandonment of his family. Your instincts about something being fundamentally wrong in your marriage were absolutely correct. I should have encouraged you to trust those instincts rather than questioning your judgment." Dr. Green went on to explain that criminal behavior often coexists with patterns of manipulation and emotional abuse that can be difficult to recognize, especially for partners who are focused on maintaining family stability. Mark's resistance to genuine partnership, his dismissal of your needs, his willingness to let you handle all family responsibilities while he pursued his own agenda. These weren't just marital problems, they were red flags indicating deeper character issues. The session was both validating and disturbing, confirming that my growing sense of disconnection from Mark had been based on legitimate concerns rather than unrealistic expectations. More importantly, it highlighted how my withdrawal from our traditional dynamic had potentially protected me from becoming further entangled in his criminal activities. If you had continued managing his schedule, handling his business communications, and serving as his unofficial administrative assistant, you might have inadvertently become involved in his fraud scheme, Dr. Green explained. Your decision to step back may have saved you from criminal liability. The thought was chilling but rang true. In our previous dynamic, I might have been processing invoices, managing client communications, or handling financial transactions that could have implicated me in Mark's criminal enterprise. My professional ethics and personal integrity would have made me an unwitting accomplice to activities I never would have knowingly supported. Tyler's adjustment to our new reality proved challenging but ultimately illuminating. Without Mark's presence, our household dynamics shifted in ways that revealed how much our family had been walking on eggshells around his moods and priorities. Tyler began spending more time at home, engaging in conversations about school and friends that had been superficial when Mark was present. "Mom, can I ask you something?" Tyler said one evening as we worked together in the kitchen, preparing dinner with a casualness that had been impossible when every family meal required careful coordination around Mark's schedule and preferences. "Of course, honey." "Were you and Dad happy? Like really happy? Or were you just pretending for Emma and me?" The question required careful consideration. I wanted to be honest about our marriage without destroying Tyler's ability to maintain some positive memories of his father. "We were happy in the beginning," I said finally. "But we grew apart over the years, and I think we both stopped being authentic about what we needed from each other. I always felt like Dad was performing when he was with us," Tyler admitted. "Like he was playing the role of father and husband instead of just being himself." The observation was remarkably perceptive for a 16-year-old, highlighting Tyler's unconscious recognition of the emotional distance that had characterized Mark's family relationships. "I feel like I can breathe differently now," Tyler continued. "Like I don't have to worry about saying the wrong thing or disappointing anyone." Our conversation revealed that both children had been unconsciously managing their behavior around Mark's expectations and reactions, creating an atmosphere of subtle tension that none of us had fully recognized while living within it. Emma's perspective was equally illuminating. Her gap semester decision, which had seemed like academic uncertainty, was revealed to be partly motivated by her desire to escape the pressure of meeting parental expectations that felt disconnected from her authentic interests and values. "I never felt like Dad actually knew me," Emma confided during one of our evening conversations. "He knew my grades and my accomplishments, but he didn't know what I cared about or what made me happy. Both children's revelations highlighted how Mark's emotional disconnection had affected our entire family system, creating an environment where everyone was performing versions of themselves rather than being authentic. 3 months after Mark's arrest, I received an unexpected phone call from David Rodriguez, the attorney handling Aunt Margaret's estate. He had information that would provide the final piece of understanding about my inheritance and its timing. "Sarah, I think you should know that your aunt's decision to leave you her estate wasn't just based on her observation of your character," David explained. She had been aware of concerns about Mark's business practices for over a year before. Her death. The revelation was stunning. "What kind of concerns?" "Your aunt had friends in the construction industry who had heard rumors about inflated billing and questionable practices. She hired a private investigator not just to learn about your life, but to investigate Mark's business activities. Aunt Margaret had known about Mark's criminal behavior before she died, and had structured my inheritance specifically to provide protection when his illegal activities inevitably came to light. She wanted you to have financial independence and legal protection when Mark's criminal enterprise collapsed," David continued. "The timing of her estate settlement, just weeks before his arrest, wasn't coincidental. She had been tracking the federal investigation and knew that charges were imminent." Even from beyond the grave, Aunt Margaret had been looking out for my welfare in ways I never could have imagined. Her inheritance wasn't just generous family support. It was a carefully planned safety net designed to catch me when my marriage imploded under the weight of Mark's criminal activities. "There's one more thing," David added. "Your aunt left detailed instructions about offering support to other women in similar situations. She established a foundation to provide financial assistance and legal resources to spouses of white-collar criminals who need help rebuilding their lives." The foundation was another aspect of Aunt Margaret's legacy that reflected her understanding of how criminal behavior affects entire families, not just the perpetrators. She had created a mechanism to help other women navigate the financial and emotional challenges of divorcing criminal spouses and rebuilding their lives independently. Mark's trial was scheduled for the following spring, with prosecutors confident that the overwhelming evidence would result in conviction on all charges. His public defender recommended accepting a plea deal that would reduce his sentence from a potential 30 years to 15 years in federal prison. I was not required to testify, but prosecutors asked if I would provide a victim impact statement, describing how Mark's crimes had affected our family. The request forced me to articulate the full scope of damage that extended far beyond financial loss, to include destroyed trust, shattered family stability, and the emotional trauma of discovering that my partner of 22 years had been living a double life. Writing the statement was both cathartic and painful, requiring me to examine not just Mark's criminal behavior, but my own role in enabling a relationship dynamic that had made his deception possible. I had been so focused on accommodating his needs and managing our family's logistics that I had stopped paying attention to inconsistencies and red flags that might have revealed his criminal activities sooner. But I also recognized that my withdrawal from our traditional dynamic, prompted by Dr. Green's misguided but ultimately helpful therapeutic intervention, had protected me from becoming more deeply entangled in Mark's criminal enterprise. My decision to stop managing his schedule and business communications had inadvertently created distance that prevented me from becoming an unwitting accomplice to his fraud. 6 months after Mark's arrest, Emma made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. She announced that she wanted to study criminal justice, with a focus on white-collar crime and victim advocacy. "I want to help other families who go through what we've experienced," she explained. "I want to understand how people like Dad become capable of such elaborate deception, and I want to help prevent other families from being destroyed by financial crimes." Emma's career choice reflected a maturity and sense of purpose that seemed to have emerged directly from our family's trauma. Rather than being broken by her father's betrayal, she was channeling her experience into professional goals that could benefit others facing similar challenges. Tyler's response was different but equally positive. He threw himself into his soccer training with renewed focus, earning recognition from college recruiters who had been impressed by his athletic development and academic performance. Without the subtle pressure of living up to Mark's expectations, Tyler seemed to be discovering his own interests and capabilities. I feel like I can finally figure out what I actually want instead of what I think Dad wanted for me, Tyler said, echoing themes that had emerged for our entire family. My own professional development continued to exceed every expectation I'd held for my career. The Chief of Operations role at Desert Valley Medical Center had provided challenges and satisfaction that reminded me of capabilities I'd possessed but never fully utilized. The executive education program at Northwestern had been intellectually stimulating and professionally transformative, introducing me to healthcare policy and strategic thinking that expanded my understanding of hospital leadership. Dr. Williams approached me in December with news that would represent the culmination of everything I'd been working toward professionally. Sarah, the board has asked me to confirm your interest in Chief Executive Officer candidacy, he announced during our monthly progress meeting. Assuming successful completion of your executive program and continued strong performance in your current role, they want to begin transition planning for my retirement. The CEO position represented professional achievement beyond anything I'd imagined possible when I was focused primarily on supporting Mark's business goals and managing our family's daily needs. But sitting in Dr. Williams' office, discussing strategic vision for one of Phoenix's largest hospital systems, the opportunity felt like the natural progression of capabilities that had always existed, but had never been fully recognized or developed. I'm absolutely interested, I confirmed. When would the transition occur? 18 months from now. That would give you time to complete your education program, gain additional operational experience, and work closely with me on strategic planning and board relations. 18 months to transition from hospital administrator to chief executive officer, leading an organization with over 3,000 employees and a budget exceeding $500 million annually. The timeline felt both ambitious and achievable, representing the kind of professional opportunity that would have been impossible to consider when my decisions were constrained by family logistics and financial necessity. Mark's sentencing hearing took place on a cold February morning, with prosecutors and defense attorneys presenting final arguments about the appropriate punishment for his crimes. I attended with Emma, both of us needing closure on this chapter of our lives. Mark had aged significantly during his months in custody, his hair completely gray now, his face showing the strain of living with the consequences of his criminal choices. When given the opportunity to address the court before sentencing, he spoke directly to his victims and to our family. I know that saying I'm sorry doesn't undo the damage I've caused, Mark said, his voice breaking slightly as he spoke. I destroyed the trust of clients who believed in me. I devastated my business partner's livelihood, and I shattered my family's faith in everything they thought they knew about me. He paused, looking directly at Emma and me in the gallery. Sarah, Emma, Tyler, you deserved so much better than what I gave you. I hope someday you can understand that everything I did was motivated by fear of not being enough, of not providing enough, of not being the man you all needed me to be. The explanation was both heartbreaking and infuriating. Mark's criminal activities hadn't been motivated by greed or malice, but by insecurity and inadequacy that had metastasized into elaborate deception and betrayal. He had been so afraid of disappointing us that he had chosen to steal from innocent people rather than admit his business failures. The judge sentenced Mark to 18 years in federal prison, with the possibility of parole after 12 years for good behavior. Justice had been served, but the number of lives destroyed by his choices would never be fully calculated. Emma and I left the courthouse for the final time, both of us feeling a mixture of relief and sadness as this chapter of our lives officially closed. Mark would spend the next 12 to 18 years in prison. Tyler would graduate high school and college while his father was incarcerated, and Emma would build her entire adult life while her father served his sentence. But we would be fine, More than fine. We would thrive in ways that might never have been possible if our family had remained intact around Mark's deception and emotional unavailability. 1 year after Mark's arrest, I stood in the boardroom of Desert Valley Medical Center, accepting congratulations from board members who had just announced my appointment as Chief Executive Officer. The transition would begin immediately, with Dr. Williams serving as an advisor during my first 6 months of leadership. Sarah, your vision for patient-centered care and operational excellence reflects exactly the kind of leadership our hospital system needs, Board Chair Patricia Hernandez said as she presented me with a symbolic key to my new office. We're excited to see what you accomplish in this role. The moment felt surreal, but also inevitable, representing the culmination of capabilities that had been developing throughout my career, but had never been fully recognized or utilized. I thought about Aunt Margaret, who had seen potential in me that I hadn't recognized in myself, and about the inheritance that had provided not just financial security, but the freedom to pursue professional goals based on passion rather than necessity. Emma was completing her sophomore year at Arizona State University, having returned to school with renewed focus and clarity about her academic goals. Her coursework in criminal justice and victim advocacy was providing both theoretical knowledge and practical skills that she planned to use in graduate school and eventually in policy work focused on white-collar crime prevention. Tyler was finishing his junior year of high school with impressive academic performance and soccer achievements that had attracted attention from several college programs. Without the subtle pressure of meeting Mark's expectations, Tyler had discovered interests in environmental science and sustainable engineering that seemed to reflect his authentic passions rather than inherited obligations. Our family had not just survived Mark's betrayal and criminal behavior. We had discovered versions of ourselves that were more authentic, more confident, and more capable than we had ever been when we were accommodating his needs and managing around his limitations. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.